Uganda, a landlocked nation in East Africa, boasts a rich history and diverse culture. From the lush landscapes of its national parks to the vibrant traditions of its many ethnic groups, Uganda is a country of remarkable diversity and beauty. The nation's cultural tapestry is woven from the threads of over 50 distinct ethnic groups, each contributing to the rich mosaic that defines Uganda today. Traditional dances, music, and festivals are celebrated with great enthusiasm, reflecting the deep-rooted heritage and communal spirit of the Ugandan people. But its journey since gaining independence from Britain in 1962 has been tumultuous, marked by both periods of progress and episodes of profound struggle. The euphoria of independence was palpable as Ugandans celebrated the dawn of a new era, filled with hope and aspirations for a brighter future. However, the path to nationhood was fraught with challenges, as the young nation grappled with the complexities of self-governance and the legacies of colonial rule. The nation's early years were marred by political instability, culminating in the rise of Idi Amin's brutal dictatorship in 1971. The political landscape was characterized by a series of coups and counter-coups, as various factions vied for power. The ascent of Idi Amin marked a dark chapter in Uganda's history, as his regime unleashed a reign of terror that would leave an indelible mark on the nation. Amin's reign of terror, characterized by widespread human rights abuses and economic turmoil, left an indelible scar on the nation's psyche. His regime was notorious for its brutality, with countless Ugandans subjected to torture, imprisonment, and extrajudicial killings. The economy, once promising, was brought to its knees as Amin's erratic policies and rampant corruption took their toll. The social fabric of the nation was torn apart, and the scars of this period are still felt today. The overthrow of Amin's regime in 1979 offered a glimmer of hope, as Ugandans dared to dream of a future free from tyranny. The fall of Amin was met with widespread jubilation, as the nation sought to rebuild and heal from the wounds inflicted during his rule. However, the road to recovery was long and arduous, as the country faced the daunting task of restoring stability and rebuilding its shattered institutions. But the subsequent years were plagued by continued violence and political turmoil. The power vacuum left by Amin's departure led to a period of intense factionalism and conflict as various groups sought to assert their dominance. The 1980s were marked by a series of violent clashes and political upheavals as the nation struggled to find its footing amidst the chaos. The scars of these conflicts are still visible today, as Uganda continues to grapple with the legacy of its turbulent past. It was against this backdrop of instability that Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Army emerged victorious in 1986, ushering in a new era for Uganda. Museveni's rise to power was seen as a turning point, as his leadership promised to bring an end to the cycle of violence and instability that had plagued the nation for so long. The National Resistance Army's victory was hailed as a triumph of resilience and determination, as Ugandans looked to the future with renewed hope. Museveni's ascent to power initially brought a sense of optimism and stability. His early years in office were marked by efforts to restore order and rebuild the nation's institutions. Museveni's government implemented a series of reforms aimed at revitalizing the economy and improving the quality of life for Ugandans. The sense of hope and possibility that accompanied his rise to power was palpable, as the nation embarked on a journey of renewal and reconstruction. His government implemented economic reforms and made strides in combating the HIV/AIDS epidemic. The introduction of market-oriented policies helped to stimulate economic growth, while efforts to address the HIV/AIDS crisis brought much-needed attention to a pressing public health issue. The government's initiatives in healthcare, education, and infrastructure development were seen as positive steps towards building a more prosperous and resilient nation. However, as Museveni's grip on power tightened, concerns about authoritarianism and the erosion of democratic principles grew louder. The initial optimism that had accompanied his rise to power began to wane, as allegations of corruption and human rights abuses surfaced. The political landscape became increasingly polarized, with opposition parties and civil society organizations facing mounting pressure and restrictions. The promise of a democratic and inclusive Uganda seemed to be slipping away, as Museveni's government sought to consolidate its hold on power. The constitution was amended to remove presidential term limits, effectively paving the way for Museveni to remain in power indefinitely. This move was met with widespread criticism both domestically and internationally, as it was seen as a blatant attempt to entrench Museveni's rule. The amendment sparked protests and debates as Ugandans grappled with the implications of a leader who seemed intent on staying in power at all costs. The erosion of democratic norms and the concentration of power in the hands of a single individual raised serious concerns about the future of Uganda's political system. Opposition parties and civil society organizations faced increasing restrictions, while allegations of corruption and human rights abuses mounted. The political space became increasingly constrained as the government sought to stifle dissent and maintain its grip on power. Reports of electoral irregularities, media censorship, and the harassment of opposition figures painted a troubling picture of a nation struggling to uphold the principles of democracy and human rights. The challenges faced by those who dared to speak out against the government underscored the difficulties of advocating for change in an environment of intimidation and repression. Uganda's political landscape today remains complex and contested. The ruling national resistance movement continues to dominate the political scene, while opposition parties struggle to gain traction amidst an environment of intimidation and limited political space. The nation's political discourse is characterized by a deep sense of division and uncertainty, as Ugandans grapple with the challenges of building a more inclusive and democratic society. The legacy of Museveni's rule looms large, shaping the contours of the nation's political future. Museveni's ruling national resistance movement dominates the political scene, while opposition parties struggle to gain traction amidst an environment of intimidation and limited political space. The political landscape is marked by a sense of unease, as the government continues to exert its influence over key institutions and processes. The challenges faced by opposition parties and civil society organizations highlight the difficulties of advocating for change in a context where power is heavily concentrated in the hands of the ruling elite. The legacy of Museveni's rule, once hailed as a beacon of hope for a nation ravaged by conflict, is now intertwined with concerns about the consolidation of power, the erosion of democratic norms, and the uncertain future of Uganda's political trajectory. As Uganda looks to the future, the nation faces the daunting task of navigating the complexities of its political landscape, addressing the challenges of governance and development, and building a more inclusive and democratic society. The journey ahead is fraught with challenges, but the resilience and determination of the Ugandan people offer a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. At the heart of Uganda's political system lies the executive branch, headed by the president. This branch is the most powerful and influential part of the government, shaping the direction of the nation through its policies and decisions. The executive branch is responsible for implementing and enforcing laws, and it plays a crucial role in both domestic and international affairs. The president, as the head of this branch, is a central figure in Ugandan politics, often seen as the face of the nation both at home and abroad. The president serves as both head of state and head of government, wielding significant power and influence. This dual role means that the president is not only the symbolic leader of the country, but also the chief executive officer, responsible for the day-to-day administration of the government. The president's duties include signing bills into law, issuing executive orders, and representing Uganda in diplomatic matters. The president's influence extends to all branches of government, making this position one of immense responsibility and authority. Elected through a national vote, the president appoints key government officials, commands the armed forces, and sets the national agenda. The election process is a significant event in Uganda, with citizens participating in the democratic process to choose their leader. Once elected, the president has the authority to appoint ministers, judges, and other high-ranking officials, shaping the administration according to their vision. The president's role as commander-in-chief of the armed forces further underscores the importance of this position, as it involves making critical decisions about national security and defense. This concentration of power in the presidency has been a defining feature of Uganda's political landscape, particularly under the long rule of Yoweri Museveni. Museveni, who has been in power since 1986, has significantly shaped the country's political and economic policies. His tenure has seen both development and controversy, with supporters praising his leadership and critics pointing to issues of governance and human rights. Museveni's influence is evident in the way the executive branch operates, with a strong emphasis on presidential authority and control. The vice president, appointed by the president, acts as a deputy and assumes the presidency in the event of the president's death, resignation, or incapacitation. This role is crucial for ensuring continuity of government, providing a clear line of succession. The vice president often represents the president at official functions and may be tasked with specific duties or projects. However, the extent of the vice president's influence largely depends on the president's delegation of responsibilities. However, the vice president's role is largely ceremonial, with limited constitutional powers. While the vice president may have a public presence and participate in various events, the actual decision-making power remains with the president. This has led to debates about the effectiveness and necessity of the vice presidency, with some arguing for a more defined and empowered role. The Prime Minister, also appointed by the President, is responsible for leading the government's business in Parliament and coordinating the work of government ministries. This position involves managing the legislative agenda, ensuring that government policies are implemented, and working closely with ministers to address national issues. The Prime Minister plays a key role in the legislative process, often acting as a liaison between the executive branch and Parliament. However, the Prime Minister's influence is contingent upon the President's favor and can be limited by the President's direct control over key ministries and decision-making processes. The President's overarching authority means that the Prime Minister must navigate a complex political landscape, balancing the demands of Parliament with the directives of the President. This dynamic can lead to tensions and challenges in governance, particularly when there are differing views on policy and administration. This structure has led to a centralization of power within the presidency, with the vice president and prime minister often playing secondary roles. The concentration of authority in the hands of the president has implications for the balance of power within the government, affecting how decisions are made and implemented. While the vice president and prime minister have important functions, their roles are often overshadowed by the president's dominant position. Critics argue that this concentration of power undermines democratic principles and accountability. They contend that a more balanced distribution of power would enhance transparency and ensure that different branches of government can effectively check and balance each other. The current system, they argue, risks creating an environment where the president's decisions go unchallenged, potentially leading to abuses of power and a lack of responsiveness to the needs and concerns of the populace. The president's ability to appoint and dismiss key officials without significant checks and balances raises concerns about potential abuse of power and the erosion of institutional independence. This power allows the president to shape the judiciary, the military, and other critical institutions, potentially compromising their ability to operate independently. Critics argue that this undermines the rule of law and weakens the foundations of democracy, as it concentrates too much power in the hands of a single individual. The dominance of the executive branch within Uganda's political system remains a subject of debate, with calls for greater separation of powers and enhanced oversight mechanisms to ensure a more balanced and accountable government. Advocates for reform argue that strengthening the legislative and judicial branches would create a more robust system of checks and balances, preventing any one branch from becoming too powerful. They believe that such changes are essential for promoting good governance, protecting human rights, and fostering a more inclusive and participatory political environment. Uganda's legislative branch, tasked with representing the people's voice and enacting laws, centers around the unicameral National Assembly. Comprising 529 members, the parliament is meant to serve as a forum for debate, scrutiny of government actions, and the passage of legislation. Members are elected through a combination of first-past-the-post and proportional representation systems, aiming to ensure a degree of representation for both geographic constituencies and political parties. However, the effectiveness of the National Assembly in fulfilling its democratic mandate has been questioned. Critics argue that the parliament's independence has been eroded by the dominance of the ruling National Resistance Movement, which holds a significant majority of seats. This dominance, coupled with allegations of intimidation and vote rigging, has raised concerns about the fairness and transparency of parliamentary elections. Furthermore, the parliament's ability to provide effective oversight of the executive branch has been limited by a lack of resources, capacity, and political will. The executive branch's control over key appointments, combined with allegations of patronage and corruption, has led to accusations that the parliament is often beholden to the executive, rather than acting as an independent check on its power. Section 4. Justice, blindfolded and bound, the Ugandan judiciary. The Ugandan judiciary, constitutionally designed to be an independent arbiter of justice, faces a complex and challenging reality. Tasked with upholding the rule of law, protecting human rights, and ensuring accountability, the judiciary operates through a hierarchical structure, with the Supreme Court at its apex. The judiciary's mandate encompasses adjudicating disputes, interpreting the Constitution, and reviewing the legality of government actions. However, the judiciary's independence has been undermined by a confluence of factors, including political interference, limited resources, and capacity constraints. The president's power to appoint judges, coupled with allegations of executive pressure on judicial appointments, has raised concerns about the impartiality of the judiciary, particularly in cases involving political opponents or sensitive issues. Furthermore, the judiciary grapples with a lack of adequate funding, infrastructure, and trained personnel, hindering its ability to effectively dispense justice. Case backlogs, lengthy trial delays, and limited access to legal representation, particularly for marginalized communities, further erode public trust and confidence in the judicial system. Section 5. From one-party rule to a multitude of voices. Uganda's political landscape has undergone a significant transformation in terms of its party system. From the early days of independence to the present, the journey has been marked by significant upheavals and shifts in governance. Following the turmoil of the early post-independence years, the country experienced a period of one-party rule under Milton Obote's Uganda People's Congress, or UPC. Obote's leadership was characterized by efforts to consolidate power and establish a centralized government. This system, characterized by the suppression of opposition and limitations on political freedoms, ultimately contributed to the instability that plagued the nation. Political dissent was often met with harsh reprisals, and the lack of political plurality stifled democratic growth. The rise of Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Movement, or NRM, in 1986 ushered in a new era, initially marked by a no-party system. Museveni's ascent to power was seen as a beacon of hope for many Ugandans who had grown weary of the previous regime's authoritarianism. Museveni argued that a multi-party system would exacerbate ethnic divisions and hinder national unity. He believed that the no-party system would foster a sense of collective identity and reduce the factionalism that had previously torn the country apart. However, this system, while ostensibly aimed at fostering unity, effectively concentrated power within the NRM and limited political competition. The NRM's dominance meant that political discourse was often one-sided, and alternative voices struggled to be heard. In 2005, following a national referendum, Uganda transitioned to a multi-party system. This move was seen as a significant step towards democratization, allowing for a broader spectrum of political opinions and greater citizen participation in the political process. This move was hailed by some as a step towards greater democracy and political pluralism. The introduction of multiple political parties provided Ugandans with more choices and the opportunity to engage in more robust political debates. However, the multi-party system has faced significant challenges. Despite the promise of a more open political environment, the reality has been marred by ongoing struggles for power and influence. The NRM, with its extensive patronage networks and control over state resources, has maintained a dominant position. This dominance has often translated into an uneven playing field, where opposition parties find it difficult to compete on equal terms. Opposition parties have struggled to gain a foothold, facing intimidation, limited access to media, and accusations of electoral irregularities. These challenges have hindered the development of a truly competitive political landscape, leaving many Ugandans questioning the effectiveness of the multi-party system in delivering genuine democratic governance. Section 6. The Ballot and the Ballot Box. Elections in Uganda. Elections, the cornerstone of any democratic system, are a regular feature of Uganda's political calendar. Presidential elections are held every 5 years, with the president elected through a simple majority system. Parliamentary elections, also held every 5 years, employ a mixed electoral system, combining first-past-the-post and proportional representation. However, despite the regular holding of elections, concerns about the credibility and fairness of these electoral processes persist. Allegations of voter intimidation, vote rigging and irregularities in the compilation of voter registers have marred past elections. The use of state resources to support the ruling party's campaigns, coupled with restrictions on opposition rallies and media access, has further skewed the playing field.